All right. Good afternoon. Getting down to business here. I'll start off with the latest update on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine, which continues to be deeply concerning and shows the human cost of this war and the human suffering. As I mentioned yesterday, the UN Refugee Agency estimates that 1.9 million people have been internally displaced, most of them in the west and northwest, with about 500,000 displaced people in Zakarpatska, 387,000 in Lvivska, and about 170,000 in Volynska. The UN Refugee Agency also said there are now more than 2.5 million women, children, and men, although mostly women and children, who've crossed international borders out of Ukraine. For its part, the WHO said that since February 24th, there have been 29 attacks impacting health facilities, healthcare workers, and ambulances. WHO stressed that medical facilities, medical personnel, and medical transport must always be respected in war. We also have reports from the UN Children's Fund that leads the water, sanitation, and hygiene work of the humanitarians, and that in the east, about 650,000 people in Donetsk Oblast and about 400,000 people in Luhansk Oblast do not have access to water. In Mariupol and Donetsk, safe drinking water is urgently needed. For its part, the World Food Programme said that 2,000 people have received value vouchers and that it will scale up this distribution to reach more people in areas where markets and systems are functioning. In Kharkiv, WFP contracted bakeries increasing its production line with a daily target of 30,000 loaves of bread, and that will benefit about 60,000 people. On funding, as of today, the Ukraine Flash Appeal, which is asking for $1.1 billion, has received $129 million, which is 11% funded. So we're going in the right direction, but we wish we were getting there a little faster. Also want to flag today, the UN food agencies at Rome issued a report showing the implication of the conflict in food security around the world. The World Food Programme is warning that the cost of its global operations looks set to rise by $29 million a month. When added to pre-existing increases of $42 million since 2019, the total additional cost WFP is facing is $71 million a month. This could spell disaster for millions, as WFP had already warned that 2022 would be a year of catastrophic hunger, with 44 million people in 38 countries teetering on the edge of famine. For its part, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization warns that supply chains and logistical disruptions on Ukrainian and Russian grain and oilseed production, as well as restrictions on Russia's exports, will have significant food security repercussions. FAO said that this is especially true for some 50 countries that depend on Russia and Ukraine for 30% or more of their wheat supply. The Director General of the FAO, Shu Dongyu, warned that prices, already on the rise since the second half of 2020, reached an all-time high in February of this year due to high demand, input and transportation costs, and port disruptions. He warned that likely disruptions to agricultural activities of these two major exporters of staple commodities could seriously escalate food insecurity globally when international food prices are already very volatile. And you, of course, saw this morning the Security Council held an open meeting on Ukraine. Briefing council members was the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Izumi Nakamitsu, and she said that the UN is not aware of any biological weapons programs in Ukraine. Ms. Nakamitsu noted that this is largely thanks to the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention, to which both the Russian Federation and Ukraine are states parties. Ms. Nakamitsu said the situation such as this demonstrate the need to further strengthen the Biological Weapons Convention, to operationalize it and institutionalize it. She also addressed the worrying issue of the safety and security of nuclear power plants in Ukraine. Both her remarks and the remarks of Rosemary DiCarlo, the Undersecretary General for Peace Building and Political Affairs, have been distributed to you. Ms. DiCarlo noted that the war in Ukraine is now in its third week and fighting continues unabated. She said the Russian armed forces are pushing their offensive operations and laying siege to several cities in the south, east, and north of the country. Ms. DiCarlo stressed that all alleged violations of international humanitarian law must be investigated, and those found responsible should be held accountable. She added the Secretary General is grateful to the many member states that are working towards a diplomatic solution to this dangerous conflict, and that he's in regular contact with regional and other leaders, and is, the Secretary General said in a statement we issued early this morning on the to mark the end of the 11th year of the Syrian conflict, and he said that the destruction that Syrians have endured is so extensive and deadly that it has few equals in modern history. There must be no impunity, he said. Mr. Guterres added that we must not lose hope, we must act now. Secretary General said we must show the courage and determination to move beyond rhetorical commitments to peace and to do all that is necessary to reach a negotiated political solution in line with Security Council Resolution 2254. At the same time, he added, we must ensure greater humanitarian access to address the needs of people throughout the country. The Secretary General emphasized that we cannot fail the Syrian people. He called on all parties to meaningfully engage in UN-facilitated political process and appeals for further support to scale up the humanitarian response. We must choose peace, he said in the message. And just to flag that this weekend, the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, will travel to Beirut in Lebanon to attend the Arab Regional Forum on Sustainable Development. She will also meet with the UN regional directors and resident coordinators in the region, as well as senior officials and other stakeholders, to discuss strategies and programs that can help countries accelerate progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. In addition, she will meet with women and youth, as well as UN staff affected by the explosion in the port in August of 2020. The Deputy Secretary General will then go on to Paris on the 17th and 18th of March to engage with permanent delegates to UNESCO leadership, and senior government officials, and the Secretary General's 2022 Transforming Education Summit. That summit is supposed to take place in September. The first week, turning to Yemen, the first week of bilateral consultations with various Yemeni stakeholders concluded yesterday. Leaders from major Yemeni parties met with the Secretary General's Special Envoy, Hans Grunberg, to discuss ideas for his framework, including multi-track processes that aim to chart a path towards a sustainable political settlement to the conflict in Yemen. All participants welcomed the consultations, expressed support for Mr. Grunberg's efforts. Some of the key points raised during the first week focused on the need to address the plight and common challenges facing all Yemenis, including the humanitarian situation and alarming living conditions of civilians across the country, and the need to address the fractured economy. Mr. Grunberg will continue his planned bilateral consultations with other parties and stakeholders in the coming weeks. I have our weekly humanitarian update from northern Ethiopia, where the humanitarian situation there continues to be of extreme concern. Humanitarians' needs are growing as fighting continues in Afar's Kilbeti zone, and sporadic clashes are reported in Amhara, near the boundary with Tigray. In Afar, hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children have reportedly been displaced since late last year, but the fighting continues to limit access to many areas, including where we have not been able to verify exact numbers. In Amhara, people continue to flee to Kobo, Zekwala, Sekota, Zarima districts. Authorities estimate that in Kobo now hosts over 53,000 displaced people. We and our partners are continuing to provide assistance in Amhara and Afar as security allows. In Amhara, we, the governments and local NGO partners, provided food to more than 588,000 people in the past week, bringing the total number of people we've helped to 7.4 million since late December. In Afar, the past week, 87,000 people received food assistance in the conflict-affected Kilbeti zone. We hope to reach some 620,000 men, women, and children with food across Afar in the coming weeks. And in Tigray, deliveries of aid and fuel by road remain suspended, with humanitarian organizations significantly reducing or suspending operations. In the past week, only an extremely small fraction of the 870,000 people meant to receive assistance That's 34,000 people. Some 34,000 receive food assistance. This includes 23,000 refugees from Eritrea. On a more positive note, medical and nutrition supplies continue to be flown in to Tigray, to Mekelle, with about 100 tons of supplies arriving in recent weeks. But this remains far less than can be transported by a single convoy of trucks, of course. In addition to lack of fuel, affects the delivery of supplies from Mekelle to other parts of Tigray. Quick humanitarian update from Mozambique. Our colleagues there tell us that tropical cyclone Gombe made landfall in Nampula province today. According to estimates from national authorities, it has the potential to impact more than 584,000 people, almost 700 health centers, and over 7,000 schools. We're especially concerned about the 1.4 million people living in high-risk areas that will be exposed to the cyclone for 4 consecutive days. We're in close contact with authorities to provide immediate support and humanitarian assistance. The new crisis comes in addition to the impact of Storm Ana, which hit the country in January, and the ongoing complex crisis in Cabo Delgado that has displaced 730,000 people. Mozambique needs $400 million for the humanitarian response to the crisis in the north, and Cyclone Gombe will bring an additional pressure on humanitarian needs as well as the country's economy. And in Malawi, our UN team there, led by acting resident coordinator Shikegi Komatsubara, tells us that it continues to support the government to contain the recent polio outbreak. Malawi confirmed its first polio case in 30 years on February 16. This was also the first polio case in Africa in more than 5 years. So far, there's been no further spread of the disease in Malawi, thanks to swift and concerted efforts by the national authorities, supporting by WHO and UNICEF. A communication campaign on polio prevention was rolled out immediately, while we backed a rapid response team that has been helping on coordination, surveillance, data management, communications, and other operations. The 2 UN agencies are supporting several rounds of mass immunizations against polio, with the first round set to begin on the 21st. And I want to flag the Secretary General spoke today by phone with the Foreign Minister of Egypt and the President of COP27, the President designate of COP27, Sameh Shoukry. The Secretary General offered the support of the UN system to work closely with COP27 presidency on key priorities areas to deliver ambition and concrete outcomes in light of the worsening climate crisis. The Secretary General stressed the importance of much deeper and faster emission cuts, especially from G20 countries, as well as vastly improved outcomes on adaptation, particularly on doubling finance for adaptation starting point until reaching the 50% mark of total climate finance. Mr. Guterres and Minister Shoukry agreed to continuing collaboration during this year in the lead up to COP27, which, as you will recall, will take place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And we end on a positive note. 2 countries have paid up their regular budget dues in full, one in Africa, one in Europe. Both their capitals start with the letter A. One is a very ancient capital, and one is a more recently established capital. Athens and Abuja. So we say thank you to our friends in Nigeria, and thank you, Evkaristo, to our friends in Greece.
Stefan, as of yesterday, Ukrainian refugees who went through France were stuck in Calais because they could not get a visa to go to London. It was so difficult. Also, London said that they could come. Do you know if it's getting better? Because yesterday it was not.
I don't know. We can check with our UNHCR colleagues. I'd seen reports about the UK authorities kind of streamlining the processes. Obviously, I think there's a lot of the numbers are overwhelming, but obviously we thank all these countries for their generosity.
A follow-up to Sylvia's question. Did the UNHCR process those refugees and they were issued a refugee status or an ID, or it's still in a chaotic?
I don't think it's chaotic. I think it's being processed by the host governments with support for UNHCR. What sort of documentation they're given, I don't know. You may want to check with our colleagues in UNHCR here in New York.
Okay. Second question: is there any possibility to arrange briefing with Undersecretary Generals Rosemary DiCarlo and Nakamichi regarding Ukraine?
We can see what we can do.
Thank you.
Okay. Sure, Celia, go ahead.
Following up on the questions, what happens if those refugees have lost everything? They have no identification, nothing. What happened?
Well, I think if they have no identification, I mean, listen, you're leading me into a very technical discussion on refugees. I would ask you to talk to UNHCR, but we've seen other places where people are given some sort of temporary identification, either from the receiving state or from UNHCR. Okay, Alan. Gotta be ready, Alan.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Given the fact that Madam Nakamitsu said that the UN is not aware of any signs of military biological programs in Ukraine, does that mean that the UN is not going to look into the call of Russian Parliament to hold an investigation in this of this situation, of these statements by Russian side? That's the first question, please. And the second is concerning Meta platforms, which now allows Facebook and Instagram to use to do in some countries kind of a calls for violence against Russians military stuff, and according to some media reports, even allows to wish a death to Presidents Putin, Lukashenko. Any comments regarding that? Thank you.
I think you may have seen our human rights colleagues express their concern. They said they would raise it directly with the company involved. I can tell you from our standpoint, we stand clearly against all hate speech, all calls for violence. That kind of language is just unacceptable from whichever quarter it comes from. I think we will continue to report on biological weapons. On what we know, the UN does not have a mandate to do an investigation unless it's given a mandate. But we will obviously continue. I mean, Ms. Nakamitsu and others will continue to monitor the situation very closely. Ibtisam.
Thank you, Steph. So the Israeli government, sorry, I just want to get the Israeli Knesset, not government, approved the so-called the Citizenship and Inter-Israel Law, temporary order for 2022. So the law is not totally new. There was a similar one in 2003, I think, and the law bans the unification of Palestinian families as it prohibits the Interior Ministry from granting residency or citizenship status to Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza who are married to other Palestinian citizens of Israel. The law added also other issues. So, in other words, Palestinian citizens of Israel who are married to other Palestinians from the West Bank cannot be unified with their families. Do you have any comments on that?
I saw the press reports. We've been talking to our human rights colleagues who are looking into it, and I hope to get something from them very soon. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat or anywhere else. Oh, Celia, this is. I mean, with. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a candid question, but I'd like to hear what you have to say. When a country, whatever the country is, target children and kill children, what can be done? Because whether in Syria or anywhere in the world where somebody was at war, were killed, and nothing happened. So what can be done?
There needs to be accountability, whether it's done at a national level, whether it's done through existing international legal means. It involves also the will of the member states to ensure the pursuit of that accountability. And accountability can come, is often doesn't come, and is often too slow to come, but it doesn't mean that it can't happen. Ms. Kubiak, and I will leave you in Farhan's hands most of next week.